Hey there, Angry Planet listeners. Matthew here. Just a quick show note up at the beginning. So this is something that always kind of happens when you're doing a podcast about reactive breaking news. We recorded this on Tuesday. I edited it on Wednesday. And on Wednesday evening, kind of Thursday morning, some more news broke. We got more information about Thomas Matthew Crooks. It kind of confirmed some of the things that we were talking about in this episode, kind of just more stuff about his background and his Steam messages. It appears, early indications are that he was kind of looking for a target of opportunity and that the Trump rally happened to be the closest thing near to where he lives. I would point you to the New York Times reporting on this that kind of broke as I was finishing the edit here. Anyway, everything else to hear is great. I just wanted to add that little bit of context right up at the top. And away we go. You know what I've been forgetting to do, Jason, is...
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Angry Planet. Welcome to another conversation about conflict. Oh, I fucked it up. I screwed it up already. I know, great way to start. Welcome to another conversation about conflict on an Angry Planet. It's kind of the NPR read, right? Like the low voice.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, Terry Gross here. Thanks. That's just what we needed. Rick Perlstein's joining us, and he is a writer, a historian, and he is in Milwaukee, of all places, because that's his job.
It's my natal village, back in the Milky Way.
Is that really what they call it? I've never heard that.
Yeah, the just a little bit of Milwaukee lore. There was a drive-through called with Wisconsin frozen custard, which is a thing called the Milky Way, kind of its nickname for Milwaukee, and that was the inspiration for a Happy Days.
Nice bit of 1950s nostalgia intruding on the 70s.
Right, exactly. I don't connect, Matthew. You know how I.
You know, nostalgia for one's youth leads to all sorts of problems, and perhaps that is why we're here, where we are in America writ large.
Yeah, so actually, that's a great way to ask. Where are we in America right now?
Yes, we are in that place where the longing for prelapsarian innocence, potentially creates mountains of corpses, right? Also called fascism. No, we're not there yet. But we have, kind of incipient fascism, let's call it. And we're in a terrible place. I mean, it's just the kind of multiple systematic and institutional failings kind of intruding and imploding one upon the other. I mean, what would obviously in any other country or in the eyes of history would be considered something like a constitutional coup in the eyes in the form of this young low-level judge deciding that the president will be able to keep his own nuclear secrets, right?
Yeah.
Technicality. I mean, that's exactly the kind of stuff you see Weimar era jurists dealing with. I mean, what was the other latest apocalyptic thing that just, well, I mean, in Chicago we have 13-year cicadas and 17-year cicadas coinciding, which has kind of created this 150-year biblical plague. We'll call that a symbol. But yeah, and the intrusion of political violence, not just in the form of this assassination attempt, but almost kind of institutionalized. I mean, you might say that the guy who walked into the Walmart in El Paso and shot everyone he thought looked Mexican was an act of political violence, a kind of stochastic terrorism inspired by the rhetoric of the president, or the Tree of Life shooting, or the way county election administrators are quitting in droves because they're terrified of threats. One of the things Ellsberg writes in his book on nuclear wars, people say nuclear weapons haven't been used since 1945, but he says no, they're used all the time, right? You use them you use violence. It's the threat of violence. That's the work it does. And violence and the threat of violence, saturates our everyday politics. So that brings us to, not something that's kind of unheard of. I mean, a lot of what America looks like now is what, Reconstruction era to Jim Crow era to civil rights, high civil rights, massive resistance era South looked like, but nationalized. The florid conspiracy theories, the fetishization of violence, the longing for this supposed, again, relapsarian innocence when everyone kind of knew their place. And of course, the fecklessness of the forces of good in fending it off. So that's the big picture, 30,000 feet, which brings me to your doorstep.
Well, I just had a horrible parallel pop into my head. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, welcome to my world.
Okay, all right. Well, here's what just popped into my head. Paul von Hindenburg, president of Germany, doddering and on the edge of dementia, was the one who let Hitler into the barn.
Right. And Fritz von Papen, who wasn't necessarily doddering, but, kind of had the same kind of thing top of mind that, someone like Jamie Dimon does, which is that basically once we get this guy in power, we can control him, we can use him, we can ride the tiger, and maybe he'll eat us last.
Oh, we are in deep shit.
But
yeah.
Trump is not Hitlerian, right? Like he's
Trumparian. Trump, yes, and Hitler was not Trumparian, right? I mean, Trump has qualities, in a state where there's 3 guns for every person or whatever, that Hitler didn't have going for him, and Hitler wasn't Hitler, until he was Hitler, right? So I'm not going to allow you that comfort.
Fair enough. That's fair. I mean, I was.
Now he has his Reichstag fire and he has risen.
Okay, let's focus on this. It is very bizarre to me. Already on Tuesday, because we talked about having you on to talk about the assassination, and you and I talked a little bit back and forth. Assassination attempt. Fair.
Attempt.
Sorry.
Not like Paul McCartney and the Beatles.
No, and I'm wondering how this thing is being processed, what you are seeing at the RNC, how this thing is being processed and kind of mythologized, and what the symbol means to people right now.
It's being processed as providential. I mean, it's being, sluiced through this profoundly religious imagery, and you heard people say that. I mean, the guy who gave the benediction at the end, said, Donald Trump was, saved for this moment. I could send you guys an email I just got from the, not a personal email, but a promotional email from the inimitable Roger Stone, who's told the story of the time, Donald Trump supposedly survived a helicopter accident in 1989. And that's when he knew that in 1989, Roger Stone knew this. That's when I knew, he says, that Donald Trump was destined to become president, right? And this, magnificent image of him, raising his fist, with surrounded by the way, if you look at the rest of the image, these kind of hard men in black, right? I mean, they kind of have a Freikorps vibe about them, and the flag, right? And, other ways, just kind of a way to, think about Biden and the Democrats. One thing that happened last night was, as people were kind of leaving the hall, these guys were holding this really creepy banner, whose semiotics I haven't yet, found a way to parse. And the guy was wearing a T-shirt that said, "Hey, Joe, it was an assassination attempt." And this was a response to Joe Biden saying, I think he said something like, "I have my own theories, but let's wait for law enforcement to, give us the lead about what we can say about this before, saying anything rash." And this was just the classic right-wing move of saying, no, we have perfect moral clarity, Manichaean. How else is it being processed? Well, of course, I don't know what the coverage was like. But, there was this movement, kind of 2/3 of the way into the proceedings where they kind of showed Donald Trump on camera on the video screen in these affairs. I like to call them the telescreen, down in the bowels of the arena, like, kind of use like this, this cameo from Spinal Tap that had made it into the cutting room floor, and he's down in the bowels of the arena. And as soon as it shows up, first of all, he's got, a bandage on his ear that's like, as big as an earmuff, and that reminded me. I mean, you see all these resonances of how John Connolly had his arm in a sling for like the next 3 years after surviving the Kennedy assassination, and was mocked for the kind of political opportunism of that. But as soon as you see him, and there was just this astonished gasp and applause, and then eventually he kind of made his way to his box. And as soon as he actually appeared, everyone rose, and I guess our own version of the salute is the cell phone rising to record the moment. And I was right next to kind of where the Texas gallery is. And I don't know if you guys have been to Republican conventions, but Texans always wear a uniform with cowboy hats, and they were all basically standing reverently at attention. And there were 3 or 4 more speakers. Donald Trump didn't speak. Lee Greenwood introduced him, with that incredible fascist anthem, "I'm glad to be proud to be an American," which, the lyrics are just absolutely astounding. It's been around for 40 years or so, which kind of shows you how long these energies have been coursing. If tomorrow all the things were gone I've worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife, at least I have the symbolic compensation of the American flag in this body of mythology of this kind of glorious prelapsarian and past, and not what they have in a normal civilized country, if you wake up and everything you have is gone, you can count on social insurance and the provisions of solidarity to take care of you. But here we have eagles and flags. And so he comes on and he sings and says, Donald Trump was raised up for this movement. And the next 3 or 4 speakers, the poor folks, had to endure every time they showed up on stage, people chanting, "We want Trump," for 2 minutes. Nuremberg rallies come to mind. It's absolutely read through a providential lens, 100%.
And the energy is different than at other Republican national conventions. No.
That's kind of it's exactly this. Well, I mean, that's my piece that I have, which will be, kind of up probably by the time people are able to hear this. That energy was different, but that was only kind of the last, 20 minutes or so. It was the same kind of early in a convention, kind of pro forma, speech after speech after speech, and, very thematic. And, it was, not particularly interesting. You can kind of, everyone knows that they're going to be T-shirts that say "vote for the felon," or whatever the hell, nothing surprising, really.
I remember at the 2004 convention, which now is 20 years ago, which I'm embarrassed about, but it's the one I went to, they kept moving the chairs around so they could get people who were not white down in the front for the cameras.
Oh yeah, they do that. That's all very, very routine and boring, and kind of.
And that's still happening even now. Yeah.
That was a thing that I talk about in my piece. The Reagan's pollster Richard Worthling kind of figured out that they weren't going to get any white votes for a guy who had opposed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but they can kind of preserve. I mean, a lot of black votes. Yeah, but they could preserve a lot of white votes from people who felt guilty about voting for someone who was against the 1964 Civil Rights Act if they surround him by as many black people as possible. So he would, he started the tradition of Republicans giving speeches in black churches and that sort of thing.
Where's the coalition that Democrats counted on, including black people? All I've been reading about is that, people who traditionally like Democrats now hate the Democrats or just don't care about the Democrats. I mean,
Well, I mean, I think that one of the important things that you have to deal with in this moment is the fact that we all have to kind of throw out the rule book and our incumbent understandings of what has happened and what is happening and what will happen. You know, I compare it to like, you know, everyone remembers how to ride a bicycle, and everyone also remembers what it feels like when the chain slips off and you're pedaling and pedaling and pedaling and the thing you're familiar with doesn't work. Right. So, I mean, as far as, you know, members of the minority, members of the coalition, I mean, I think a lot of this just, there's this wonderful writer named Joshua Cohn who's just kind of came out. He was a Substacker named Edingermentum. And he's been basically saying for a year that, you know, if you really kind of blow away all the noise and figure out the signal, that the electorate just sees Biden as enfeeble and infirm. And, you know, that's why so many Democrats did so well in 2012, that the issue environment actually is quite strong for Democrats. And, you know, he points out that the watershed for this was the Afghan, you know, perception of a bug out, right? Which was just kind of like read publicly as, wow, this guy who we had kind of supported as a steady hand on the tiller isn't competent. So, you know, that affects all the parts of the Democratic coalition. I think I actually have a piece in the Baffler. It's kind of a joint conversation with a historian named Gerald Cadera, who is from Northwestern. And he's an expert on Hispanic Republicans. And we talk a lot about why these kind of coalitions and these kind of voting blocks are up in the air. And, you know, you can only kind of speculate. I mean, it's like the dust hasn't cleared, you know, and, you know, there's just way too much kind of glib, you know, take mongering out there. And, you know, you just have to throw your hands up in the air and say everything's different now.
Edingermentum, I think is his name. And it's at edingermentum.news.
A remarkable writer. He really cuts through the BS on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, why do you think we've gotten ourselves, why do you think the news environment has gotten itself into this position where it is take factory, it is punditry, it is opinion? Right. I see a lot of people complain about the news media and talk about how they're canceling their subscriptions, and inevitably what they're complaining about is the op-ed section.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of it is, you know, classic medium is the message stuff. I mean, just to be really cliche about it, this is how the algorithms have trained us all to think, you know, engagement through conflict, you know, and just no, you know, it's just one more set of institutional failures where there's no incentive, no reward, no kind of foundation, no roots, no sturdy kind of stage, right, for thoughtful, deep empirical work. I mean, it's just like literally there's no money in it. You know, one of the kind of, you know, of the myriad, you know, things going on, I mean, you can just kind of pull something out of the air. You can say, what does it mean that, you know, one of the, you know, 5 or 6 conglomerates that runs publishing, Hachette Publishing, which is, you know, the parent company of my publisher, is trying to sue the Internet Archive out of existence and took, you know, 500,000, I think, or 50,000 free books that you can rent, you can borrow like out of a library off the internet, right? What does it mean that, you know, another publishing conglomerate, I forget which one, you know, tried to revive the progressive publishing imprint Pantheon Books by hiring this magnificent figure named Lisa Lucas, who really was trying to reinvent publishing to make it kind of relevant for, you know, the 2020s, and got celebrated in the cover of the New York Times Magazine, you know, and they just laid her off and shut down the imprint, right? My own publisher, Little Brown, was downsized, and the people that went were the serious nonfiction editors. And that's just a way of talking about, the media environment. And jackass can knock down a barn, like Sam Rayburn said, but the idea that can have carpenters who can kind of patiently, and one of the, I would contrast this to, people are always asking me to make parallels to the 1960s, and they always want me to make kind of dumb, glib parallels. But here's a real interesting comparison, which is that in the 1960s, people knew that they were going through extraordinary times, that they needed to figure out new ways to write and think about it. So we kind of saw things like the invention of the new journalism. We saw new kinds of fiction, new kinds of film, new in-depth kinds of thinking about, kind of America's imperial role and all this rich stuff. And that is something we just don't have now. We have the Take Factory.
Do you think that we've actually, American culture has in a way run its course? I mean, we are no longer creative. We are no longer developing anything new.
I think lots of wonderful things are probably happening all over the place.
I would push back and say,
I think I always say the will to create amazing things are indomitable.
We've already mentioned one in this conversation, right? And Gurmintam over at Substack.
Right, exactly. People will always be doing amazing. So I deeply believe this. I mean, just kind of on the level of culture. I went to a freaking street festival in Chicago, and saw this band called Phenom, Finom. These two young women who sounded like Yes for the kind of generation, ironic, kind of Generation Z, kind of twee generation. So much creativity, so much magnificence. But those guys will probably be getting, getting contracts on Capitol Records in 1970, but they're playing street festivals in, 2024. So, I mean, to me, it's just, there's probably amazing stuff going on out there. But, the problem is the kind of the institutional, modes of distribution,
Yeah, the fragmentation. I mean, you have to get so lucky with Substack. You have to get so lucky. Well, you don't just have
one more
to
thing where you have a winner takes all economy, right? Yeah. It's a neoliberal model. I'm probably going to do a Substack, and I probably can do it because I have, an audience that I've built up. But I never like Substack because it's this neoliberal model. I'd much rather work for a collectivity in which people are trying to create an institution, helping each other, editing each other, But those are high margin enterprises, low margin enterprises, I should say. I mean, the fact that something like Vice, which has been so important in covering the far right and kind of embedding kind of courageous reporters within kind of neo-Nazi spaces, or something like The Intercept, is kind of imploding. So the fact that this is happening now, I'm not a 60s fetishist, but in the 60s, you saw people building these kinds of institutions, not them kind of dying.
I think that there's a tendency for people to read, to see apocalypses in their generation, and then forget that.
This time
and then forget that an apocalypse is a change. It's a great change. And the world keeps going on, and culture shifts and energies go elsewhere. 4 of the most talented writers at Vice that I worked with started a collective that's doing very well, 404 Media.
Right.
One of them was the first guy with the news of the AT&T hack this week. So good things are still possible in America.
Right, because people are good. People are creative. But, it's just the long, slow, steady damage of neoliberalism, shall we say, and, maybe the left, maybe liberalism, and, just the devolution of all sorts of institutions into, a vision of a war of all against all. I mean, that's J.D. Vance's vision, right? The idea that, liberal democracy, well, we tried that, and let's just dominate.
All right, Angry Planet listeners, we're going to pause there for a break. We'll be right back after this. All right, Angry Planet listeners, welcome back. We're on with Rick Perlstein.
Here we are, to the assassination stuff.
Let's pivot to assassins if we can, then.
Yeah, I meant to see the Sondheim musical that I didn't get to.
You know, there's I don't even know where I think there's like cams available on YouTube.
Well, it's kind of funny. You can kind of see like, you know, kind of like undergraduate, you know, kind of like Dad's Super 8 version.
Yes, exactly. That's actually that's how I originally saw it. Saw it was a campus performance in Texas was my first introduction to it. Then I ended up like tracking down the Neil Patrick Harris version. Anyway, I'm not going to go on a musical theater tangent right now. Presidential Assassins.
Good.
Loom large in American history, both successful and failed. We had a failed one on Saturday. What we'll talk about like a meta level about whether this question even matters in a second, but I am curious, what do presidential assassinations typically mean for the candidates that survive? Do they mean anything?
Well, the one I know best is Ronald Reagan's. And you know, that guy Edmund Morris wrote a really shitty, irresponsible book about, you know, Ronald Reagan, Dutch. But the one thing that he did really solidly was write about how the assassination, his survival of it, and his behavior in the wake of it just completely resuscitated his presidency. And you know, I mean, he had a pretty rough go of it. You know, but it probably would have had a much rougher go of it had not he kind of established himself in the minds of the public as this resilient guy. He didn't quite raise his fist and say fight, you know. Yeah, I mean, this guy John Connally, you know, I mean, the guy who survived the Kennedy assassination. I don't know if I've said this. I've been saying it all the time. I don't know if we were off the air or on the air, but he would keep his arm in a sling for years. And that was kind of like a standing joke that he'll have this arm in a sling forever to show what a, you know, tough, resilient guy he is. And he was incredibly ambitious and was always talked about both as a Democrat and then as a Republican, as like a best presidential possibility, a presidential possibility, until he finally did run for president in 1979 and tanked for reasons you can read about in Reaganland. But I mean, that was absolutely essential to his politics, was, you know, surviving this assassination, kind of put him on the map nationally, as it were. Yeah, I'll just kind of stop.
Reagan was obsessed with his own assassination.
Yeah, so we were talking about this. I kind of, yes. I have to write this piece, and I don't know if I'll write it now. Maybe I should let a decent interval pass. I don't know, but Reagan had this, and here I am kind of putting it out in the ether, and, you know, maybe someone will steal it, but that's okay. We all know he was this kind of athlete of the imagination, right? And this self-mythologizer, you know, it was always kind of not just crafting kind of these melodramatic tales of good versus evil, but kind of figuring out ways to place himself at the center of them. And there's this pattern in his life, and it literally goes back to the 1940s, in which he kind of imagined his own vulnerability to assassination and kind of rehearsed it in his own mind, I would argue. You know, people know about Reagan know that he was the head of the Screen Actors Guild during this, you know, big jurisdictional strike in Hollywood that was, you know, quite violent. And he was basically supporting the kind of mobbed up company union against this upstart militant left wing union that that you know, basically the sachems of Hollywood decided was a communist front. And Reagan completely picked up on this idea. And one of the things that's, I'm reading like Max Boot's Reagan biography, and it's really kind of quite unsparing. And one of the things I'm so, you know, kind of gratified to see is that he just is like, this was nonsense. There were no communists in this union. You know, they were going on strike during the war, which was, you know, way against communist policy. The guy on the other side of the strike said there were no communists in that union. This one labor priest who investigated it, very carefully said, this is nonsense. There's no communists in this union. Reagan literally said that was a conspiracy from the Vatican to kind of hide their communism. But he just decided that this was a communist attempt to take over Hollywood. In fact, one of the things I found in his papers was a contract to write a book about this. And I think that what probably happened was it just, they realized that this was nuts. And I think it was the same contract that actually became his memoir. Like he kind of picked, like he kind of made a deal. But during that violence, he writes in his first memoir, which came out in 1965, about how the police gave him a gun to use because they said they were going to come after him. And, it's quite possible that, his life was in danger. That was the kind of situation it was. But he decided that this was his own kind of heroic stand against the communist conspiracy. A guy who never fought in World War II, but kind of imagined himself as, fighting the Cold War instead. And, kind of fast forwarding, there's this astonishing moment in the memoir of Jack Germond, Fat Man in the Middle Seat. Are you guys old enough to remember Jack Germond?
I am not.
He was kind of a political journalist who was on like one of those Sunday shows every week. So he's Fat Man in the Middle Seat, and he's a centrist. Get it? But he wrote about how he was at dinner with Ronald Reagan in like 1975 and with John Sears, and they were kind of selling Reagan as a presidential candidate, and Reagan was going on and on about how all these assassination attempts that kept happening against Ford were obvious setups by Ford, to kind of increase his political fortunes. And Germond said, we knew this guy was loopy even then. Of course, he didn't necessarily say that when he was covering him, but after they're safely gone, they can kind of tell the truth, I guess. And then another situation was during that 76 campaign, someone was arrested for kind of threatening him with a fake gun, at an event, which seems like a really stupid thing to do. But he had kind of behaved in a very kind of apparently valorous way, kind of the way we think about Trump today. And then the way he just behaved after his assassination, and kind of knew how important it was to kind of strike this pose of vigor. And of course, he had these quips like at the ready, right? One of the things, do you remember the famous quip he said to his wife that, of course, became public? He said, "Honey, I forgot to duck." Right. So it's just a little different from, putting up your fist, but it was the genial Reagan version of that. And, I discovered that "Honey, I forgot to duck" was what Jack Dempsey had said to his wife or to the press or whatever after he got knocked out at Yankee Stadium against, Jack Tunney or something like that. So, I mean, it's just kind of this and in Reagan's, mind, kind of the mythology of these superheroes of sports were kind of how he kind of, a lot of the ways he kind of structured this kind of thinking. And then, just kind of going back to work and making sure that people saw him, walking and that sort of thing. And then the final part of this, kind of little riff I've kind of been throwing together over years is he, and I did write about this, he asked and persuaded the Secret Service to let him carry a handgun in the briefcase he carried everywhere as president, because he wanted to be able to, if there was an assassination attempt, he wanted to be able to help them. If you know how, presidential Secret Service, presidential details work, I mean, it's just the craziest thing ever. And the guy the idea that like the president of the United States was like carrying a gun everywhere he went, that they were kind of like humoring this old man who had these kind of hero fantasies, and, you realize that kind of at this level of the game, a Donald Trump and, probably from what we know about his ego, certainly Joe Biden, they have these scenarios in their head. And if you watch this absolutely so much fascinating visual evidence and photographic footage, the picture of the bullet, about to whiz by his ear, which is pretty handy in kind of shutting down some of the conspiracy theories, right? The fact that you watch this like, 1 minute video, what happened immediately afterwards, he's ducking behind the podium. He's kind of babbling. He kind of is like, "What about my shoes? Find my shoes, find my shoes." And he kind of sounds pathetic. He kind of sounds like he just how he doesn't want to sound in public. And finally, they're like, oh, the shooter's down, and we should maybe talk about the fact that the idea that you would assassinate an assassin as a security measure is very much of our era. It's very much of the post 9/11. Everything is terrifying. Everything's a threat, warrior cap mentality, and not the kind of mid-century, we are a nation of laws, not men. We got to bring the malefactor to justice. So, that's actually part of the melodrama, all this stuff too. The famous scene where Rosie Greer, basically subdued the assassin, I think. So, and someone says, we don't want another Oswald. We need this guy alive. We're Americans, right? We don't solve our problems through violence, right? Which is how they do it now. So, they literally blow the head off the Secret Service. Well, they're not good enough to keep the guy off the roof, but they're good enough to blow his head off after the damage is done. And that's when the Secret Service say, okay, we're clear, shooter down. So that was part of an operation. That was the plan. And then Donald Trump says, wait, as they're about to move him off the stage. And he pauses for a second, kind of composes himself. And that's when he puts his fist up and poses for the picture, basically. He had the presence of mind to kind of enact the script that was in his head, which is kind of what I feel like Reagan did.
It's funny. I hadn't considered the fact that his head was blown off immediately, but I'm looking at the list right now, Guteau, captured, trial, hang, Czolgosz, captured, trial.
Yeah, there's a whole, half the museum of the Martin Luther King Museum in Memphis is how they found the assassin. That was really important. I mean, obviously finding criminals is important, but just the idea that we're never more American than when we find these people and bring them to justice.
And now we've got this guy is dead and doesn't seem to have left much of a digital footprint. Obviously, people are pouring through his past, finding every single scrap of anything that we can about him.
Yeah, you know how we know he's Antifa, Matt?
How?
The $50 donation he made when he was 17, and also the fact that he's registered as a Republican. Well, that's what
just
those
to
people
throw you off
do.
the scent, right?
False flag.
No, so they can vote so they can screw up the Republican.
Nice.
He's clearly a very sophisticated
of course,
operative.
Yes. I mean, why else would he have appeared in a BlackRock advertisement, right? Oh, you haven't heard about this? He was in apparently
I'm in Milwaukee. I've been busy.
BlackRock visited his school and gave a lecture, and he was in the background of a couple of the shots. BlackRock has pulled the ad. It is real. It is him.
Well, if only he had realized that he had a bright career ahead of him in high finance, he could have become J.D. Vance. But yeah, that's another thing. I mean, we'll talk about him, right? But yes, we'll talk about the figure of the alienated lone assassin. Right?
That's the transition to talk about the figure of the alienated lone assassin.
Sorry, I keep on stealing your lines.
No. I think that's what's next, and I'm also struck by this through line of art affecting real life, affecting art, affecting real life, which also comes back into Reagan, right, with Taxi Driver and.
So do we have a scenario in which this guy was affected by art? I mean, besides the kind of the art such as it was at blowing shit up ranch,
Demolition Ranch.
At Demolition Ranch, which is a gun
tuber.
Right?
I mean, I would argue that people that age have absorbed far more YouTube style content than they have like traditional visual media that we would think of television and movies. That is to him his media environment. Again, having not looked at his plate, only going by the T-shirt that he was wearing, and having not looked.
Yeah, not to speculate, but that sounds fair enough. Yeah, I mean, so what you're referring to with the Reagan assassination is absolutely fascinating and really just kind of such a perfect emblem of the kind of dark Gothic side of the American story, the kind of underside of the American dream. So here I am in Milwaukee, right? And that's my hometown. And a name that kind of, I was just thinking about this, how like when you were a kid, there would always be these kind of names you'd hear on the news, and they would never explain who they were. And people kind of knew because there were these old stories, right? One of the things I learned was that Arthur Bremer was the guy who shot George Wallace in 1972 in Laurel, Massachusetts, right by the NSA, by the way. It's pretty right down the street from them. One time I went to for Nixonland, I was researching and I decided to go to the mall where he was shot, which was still there. And I literally took a wrong turn and ended up at the security gate at Fort Meade. And I was like, hey guys, I'm going to see where George Wallace was shot.
Oh, you mean Maryland?
Yes.
Sorry, you said Massachusetts.
Oh, Laurel, Maryland. Yeah, it was right. It was like an hour between Washington and Baltimore. So anyway, so he shot George Wallace in the shopping mall, classic assassination scenario. And it turns out that this guy wrote a diary. He's from Milwaukee, and the diary was actually found maybe like 2 miles from where I am now in the Bayview neighborhood of Milwaukee. Right underneath, they have these viaducts in Milwaukee, these kind of long bridges that go over this industrial valley, which separates the north and the south side. So somehow this was kind of buried. He buried his diary under this bridge, and it was found literally like across the street from my parents' office. This diary was published not too many, I think maybe like next year. I think it was published in 1973. I think like maybe Norman Mailer did an introduction or something like that. And it is like, it's perfect. It comes straight out of a 70s conspiracy movie. It's this weird, insane stream of consciousness document. It's like the Sirhan text, which is that like kill Robert Kennedy, kill Robert Kennedy, kill Robert Kennedy, kill Robert Kennedy. He talks about, just this sad, lonely man working in a chocolate factory. And he talks about, going to a massage parlor and trying to persuade the masseuse, the young woman, to, basically go all the way. And, talks about how maybe he can kill Nixon and how he's following Richard Nixon. And, this was a very familiar type to people who would have, been around then from the kind of the Oswald scenario, just this lonely, sad, pathetic guy seeking meaning in his life. And we don't even need to go into the, conspiracy part of it, which is a whole different world, different kind of part of this story. So he ends up basically saying, "Oh, I'll shoot this guy." And that very, 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 very much is the direct inspiration for the script for Taxi Driver, which is, basically about a guy who assassinates a political candidate to impress a woman, who has these fantasies of heroic rescue, when it comes to, the young prostitute played by Jodie Foster. And it is in this movie, by watching this movie, that this guy who clearly identifies with the hero, which is freaky enough, named John Hinckley, falls in love with Jodie Foster and decides that he's not going to do it to impress Candice Bergman, but who played the girlfriend, but he's going to do this to impress Jodie Foster. And this weird kind of psychosexual jumble in which, he takes his girlfriend to a porn movie and doesn't understand why she's, it's just straight out of the kind of the weird, dark imagination of this guy, Arthur Bremer. And there's a rumor that he was, at the Oscar ceremony, when Taxi Driver won the Oscar or something like that, or maybe I don't remember what the rumor was, something to do with that. But so, there's this weird kind of dark thread that kind of goes through all these things. But the figure of, this kind of alienated loner, right? And everyone's trying to find profound meaning, right? Oswald must be part of a CIA, LBJ, mafia conspiracy. It can't just be this, it's too unbearable to think that the world can stop turning on its axis because one guy taking a lucky shot, right? Which, pretty much it always is. People who want attention. One of the great essays, I think that kind of gets at this mentality is a piece by Tom Wolfe in his one of his collections, in which he says hijacking is the ultimate crime of the 1970s, because it's always kind of lonely people who want attention and want to be on camera. Look at me, the me decade. And if you look at this guy, you got the same classic profile, this kind of nerdy guy, kind of like has this sort of slightly creepy vibe. Maybe he was bullied, maybe he was not. Smart. And the thing that really sticks out with me is actually the job he had. He also has this kind of there's kind of like a Gen Z angle to it. He's 20 years old, but he lives with his parents, right? Which is kind of what Charlie Kirk talked about in his speech last night. That's what they want for you, but we have a better dream for you. It was very Reaganite. But this guy works at a nursing home, and he, basically sticks feeding tubes into people, and make sure the mush gets into these poor, sad people's bloodstreams that kind of often don't have people visiting them. The people who do this kind of work are underpaid, have no respect. Those of us who had elderly parents, in-laws, have kind of seen this, and you can just imagine this guy just kind of wallowing in anomie, misery, and saying, well, now I'm going to get people to pay attention to me. Everyone's going to know my name, which is this weird kind of obverse of, why people become Joe Biden or Barack Obama. I'm going to make my mark on history. Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you watch the documentary of Pumping Iron on him, in this mid-70s documentary, he says, one of the guys says, oh, he's the kind of guy who he wants people to know his name hundreds of years from now. It's just like this panoply of like modern alienation, and it's not a story we really know as well now, because I feel like the weird thing is like kind of these kind of resentful, alienated people kind of, I don't want to, kind of make this too direct, but that structure of thought, that kind of psychological outlook, does have its political expression in the MAGA movement. I'm your vengeance.
That's interesting. But are these the same people who, like at Newtown and the other kinds of shootings?
School shooter types.
Yeah, school shooter types. I mean,
I think
it sounds like from what you said, it sounds
maybe if this guy was 4 years older, he would have been a school shooter. Certainly fits, right?
Yeah,
I've heard an argument before that there used to be more celebrity and political assassinations because security was laxer, and that kind of alienated young man, angry at the world, that energy has moved to the place that's least offended, which is schools. It's the same kind of impulse, just directed at the.
Yeah, well, and lo and behold, it turns out the Secret Service is so crappy. Maybe he's reading those articles. We don't know what this guy knows and doesn't know, but maybe he, is reading those articles about the Secret Service guys, getting drunk in South America, between presidential events. It's certainly been in the media. Everyone knows the Secret Service sucks. They're just one more group of douchebags with a different badge, who just kind of seem to know what they're doing. Another set of institutional failures. This kind of once proud service that they were supermen, right? They were the guys who, would jump on a body, jump on the president, take a bullet for him, right? Where's John Lewis, right? Where are the people who are, putting their bodies on the line, sacrificing for the greater good, right? And it's kind of interesting. We do kind of have this guy, this fireman who died, who's also kind of being raised up as a martyr and a hero. And, it seems like just bad luck, right? Just got in the line of fire, and, God bless him, and, think about his family. But you guys know I'm obsessed with 9-line coffee, and the kind of, I don't think you guys, so I wrote a column about the phenomenon of kind of tactical culture chic in consumer products, and 9-line, so I got a Google alert for them, and 9-line coffee just put out a t-shirt with the firefighter who died. And people are desperate for heroes, right? this guy's, whatever else he is, he's probably a hero as a firefighter, but he wasn't a hero that day. He was just a guy who happened to be a firefighter and happened to die. Am I wrong? Seems to be the case.
No.
No.
No, you're not wrong. But that is one thing that kind of shocked me. I guess it shouldn't have shocked me. The merchification of the moment in the immediate aftermath.
Right. Right. And I didn't see any of that. Well, I told you I saw the guy with the T-shirt that said, "Hey Joe, it was an assassination attempt." Right.
Oh yeah.
Already.
People have.
Well, you can already picture like what some of the other merch is going to be. I mean, there's going to be a special kind of sneaker that Trump will sell, ear bandages, with and signed by the president.
I don't think I can like bear kind of going inside the hall tonight. I'm going to give myself a night off and just kind of walk around the perimeter where all the swag is. So I'll let you know what I see. I mean, look, this is a Republicans are really good at this. I remember in 2012 or which one was it? 2000. I've been to they all run together. The one where the audience seemed to spontaneously break into a chant. Oh, it must have been Sarah Palin. So we're gonna have a all the above energy policy, and then people seem to spontaneously start chanting "drill baby drill." Drill baby drill, and then you walk out of the hall and there were drill baby drill T-shirts. You didn't read about that in the New York Times, probably. They treat it like it's real.
So
I love that note of anguish in your voice, Scott. Well,
it's just I will say, I guess I'll put it this way, that I've been pretty sanguine about things and fairly hopeful for America in general.
Wow.
But the last couple weeks have not been great. And Wednesday night, I happened to or Saturday night when this assassination attempt happened, I happened to have a personal friend over who is a war correspondent, a retired war correspondent, and has spent time in a lot of war zones, has been in Somalia and everywhere, essentially. And he was very frightened and very frightening that evening as we were kind of watching the aftermath of, because we were set to eat at 7 and it happened at 6:45. So, we've got the news on and we're watching as he walks in the door and he's like, "What happened?" And he's watching this a guy whose job it is to be in a place where civil war is happening and document it and kind of understand the reasons why they occur is giving me unpleasant indications that he is worried about the future.
Right.
And then Monday comes, the weekend passes, Monday comes, newsrooms are all hopping around this thing. It is the story of the moment. And then J.D. Vance gets picked as the vice presidential nominee. And there's something about that pick specifically that...
The guy who wrote a book called Unhuman about the left.
I'm sorry, what?
That guy Jack Prozabiak or whatever? Called Unhuman. He's a Pizzagate guy, right?
He
can't serve his book Unhuman.
Good. That's great to know. No, it's just more of that kind of thing where...
Everything. What is that movie? Everything
Everywhere all at once. Yeah,
all at once.
In this J.D. Vance, this guy that's my age, who is a poster, who seems to have sold out his own family, who is obsequious, servile, doesn't seem to believe in anything except personal power. And this is maybe more overtly political than we've ever gotten on this show before, but a bad pick and a frightening pick, I think. And so it just for some reason, the assassination attempt and the picking of J.D. Vance back to back.
Right. Well, let's all, so my paradigm for explaining the world these days is the Infernal Triangle. That's the book I'm working on. It's the name of my column. And the Infernal Triangle is, the authoritarian right, the feckless Democratic Party, but it's also the bridge between all this, which is, the incompetent media, and, which really does seem to be biting on the narrative that Trump intends to, tone down his rhetoric and do it. Why can't we all get along shtick, which is, really, what kind of carnival Barker Fleece rube do you have to be to, buy that? And the Republican Party immediately, figured out that all they need to do to work the refs with this is say, well, yeah, we all have to tone down the rhetoric, starting with the Democrats stopping complaining about Donald Trump as a threat to democracy. And the media seems to be buying that too. So they deserve, they deserve, a cauldron of boiling oil, metaphorically speaking, too.
Yeah, I've always wondered, like, speaking as a person who spent the majority of their life in these newsrooms, like AP and
it's always
New York Times and all that.
Never the reporters and the stringers and the correspondents. It's always the guys with names like Washington correspondent or White House reporter or national
the people that are
editor.
supposed to tell you what something means, not just what happened.
Yeah, the people whose job it is to explain to other journalists what story they're supposed to be telling about the world. Agenda setters.
Right. Well, I mean, there's also just this whole thing where people are so afraid in these news meetings to say the wrong thing. And you go to the big boy table.
Yeah.
And,
about being polite and decorous.
Yeah, it is.
Deferential. It's Ivy League. It's Ivy League, eating club,
Yeah, and it's the opposite of what newsrooms used to be.
Right.
I mean,
page and like poker and hard drinking and.
Well, I mean, I'm 53, but I actually got a chance to see some of that shit for myself because my mom worked at the New York Daily News.
Oh wow!
And it was filled with Yeah, exactly. Well, so I mean, they really did have everything was filled with smoke. Everybody did drink. I mean, all this stuff.
They didn't go to college.
They didn't go to college. And they certainly didn't get master's degrees. I mean, give me a fucking break with the master's degree. You're going to spend $100,000 to earn $35,000.
This feels dangerously close to idealizing a prelapsarian past.
Yeah, well, that's lapsarian, man.
Yeah,
we need more lapses. No, I mean, I don't have. I mean, we could talk for 3 hours about our theories about why, kind of elite journalism is the way it is, but it ain't right. It's part of the problem. And I think, one of the rhetorical advantages I have as a historian is I always say 50 years from now, people will look at this and say this. And I think people 50 years ago will look back and they'll say, wait a sec, this happened, but this is how it was explained. It's like, wait. So some judge who was like, 40 years old, who has like no qualifications, just like affected her own constitutional coup and got to decide that, the former president gets to keep his own nuclear documents because someone didn't dot the right I and cross the right T.
Well, can we mention that she was appointed by him?
Appointed by him? I mean, yes, in any other context, that would be called a constitutional coup,
Yeah. Well, I mean, when George W. Bush was given the election by people he and his father had appointed,
right?
His father had appointed.
Alito later said that Bush, the argument that that Bush v. Gore turned on was shit.
Let me.
All right. Thanks very much.
Let me ask this as a meta question to see us out.
Sure.
What is the role of the historian in a moment like this?
Oh man, to find the kindest bud he can find, and no, just kidding. You don't have to cut that. That's okay. It's legal where I live. I mean, so this is interesting. When you reached out to do this podcast, I waited 24 hours, which is not usual. I'm like, one of those assassinations or presidential candidates. I need people thinking about my name, getting that out there. But I did kind of realize that like I'm so kind of overwhelmed and my pores are so open to all this stuff after all these years. And my instinct is just to like immediately start kind of whack-a-moling the bullshit. And there was just way too much, and that I just needed to I couldn't possibly, So what I just kind of decided to do is I went on Twitter and I said, hey, I'm not going to say anything for a while. I'm just going to think and absorb. And hopefully I can model some kind of sagacious kind of patience and big picture thinking that isn't glib, that isn't cynical, that isn't tendentious. I think that's something I might honor in the breach sometimes. And resist the temptation of authority. I think that nobody knows anything. I constantly am telling reporters, don't call historians, ask the people who are involved in these events, right? We don't have some skeleton key. This is not 1968. This is not 1972. This is 2024. And just kind of counsel, as much as humanly possible, some kind of calm absorption of what is happening, without sentiment, without fear, without favor. I'm not going to say without bias, because I think, my bias is towards, preserving democracy and fighting fascism, just maybe a little bit of calm, which, I don't know, I'm pretty histrionic when it comes to this stuff. So maybe, but I think that hopefully I'm appropriate to the movement and not, I've certainly been accused of disaster porn. But I mean, what can I tell you? When you have war correspondents coming back from Mogadishu and saying, "Oh, this reminds me of that," something's happening here, and what it is ain't exactly clear.
That's all for this week, Angry Planet listeners. As always, Angry Planet is me, Matthew Gold, Jason Fields, and Kevin Nodell. It was created by myself and Jason Fields. If you like us, please go to angryplanetpod.com, kick us $9 a month. You get early commercial-free access to all of the episodes, and you get bonus episodes, another one cooking soon. This one got released mainline and commercial-free at the same time because we recorded it on the Tuesday after the Saturday. I edited it on a Wednesday. I'm releasing it Thursday morning. God knows, the news is moving so fast right now that I have no idea what things are going to be like on Friday. So I just figured it was best to just get this out the door. I'm hoping everyone understands. We will be back soon with another conversation about conflict on an Angry Planet. Stay safe until then.